Welcome back to the Green Workbench. I was lucky enough to have a friend who works at a place where they had an old barn on their property and they planned on taking the barn down. So I went over for a couple afternoons and took out as much wood as I could get. I've got some great barn doors, but also just a bunch of wood slats. So my first step is to clean it up and to get out all the nails. So I'm going to be using the pry bar and hammer to get those nails out. I also have a small metal detector that I've borrowed that I'll sweep over each piece to make sure that I get all metal nail staples. So the last thing I want is to be running it through the saw and cause a dangerous situation because it hits a nail or something halfway through. So we'll get working on that. That's going to take quite a while, and then perfect timing. It'll be time to start working on Christmas presents. Alright, we've got all the nails out, so now it's time to clean them up. So make sure you're wearing a mask and gloves. I'm going to start actually with the brush. Brush it down. Get all of that loose dirt off. Clean them up, and then we can start working with them. So I've got the boards cleaned off. Now I need to square off the ends before I can glue them together. So I'm going to run each end through the table saw to square it off, and then we'll be ready to start putting them together. Make sure you wear a mask when you're cutting this old wood. Once you've cut all the ends square, you want to try to fit them into your tabletop the way that you want them. So arrange them until you get the arrangement you want. Now I've got a rabbet joint along the edges, but on the pieces that are where the ends are connecting, we want to join those somehow. So I'm going to mark a spot on each board and then use the biscuit joiner to create a joint. It doesn't matter if it's in the middle of the board, it just has to be matching up together so that when you cut those biscuits, they line up. So we have the biscuit joiner ready. So we'll line it up. And we'll do that for each one. Okay, so I cut the biscuits and I've glued and clamped. So glued the butt joints with the biscuits and then also the rabbets. And these pieces are clamped down to keep it from popping, because when you tighten it, it has a tendency to pop up unless you have something stopping it. So that's what these cross braces are, and they're just clamped to stop that from happening. Tighten it all down and we'll let it sit overnight. We're using barn wood, of course, so kind of the point is that there are imperfections, but after we get it done, we'll square it up by cutting the ends and we'll sand it down. Okay, so this table is all glued together. It's not a really strong bond, so we're going to put these braces on the underside. We're going to put them on anyway. So I ripped them so that it's about 3.5 inches short of each end, because there's going to be an apron all the way around. So I'm going to glue these slats and then screw them in each board. And I've got 4 of them, and be evenly spaced. I'm coming in a foot from each end, and then I'll evenly space them, and that should hold everything together and keep the bond strong. So we have the bond of the rabbet joint and also the braces. So the next step was to make the bench top using the same method as the tabletop. Glue the rabbet joints together, biscuit joint the butt ends, and put a brace on the top, on the underside across all three boards, and screw the brace in. So we'll let that dry, and next we'll start on the apron for the table. Okay, so we took some more boards and we need to start trimming for our apron, the table apron. So ripped it on the table saw. It's about 3.5, a little over 3.5 for the apron. And we did that purposely because we wanted the rabbet edge of the board to still be useful. So we're using that, and we glued that rabbet edge on the long sides of the tabletop to finish off the sides of the tabletop. See there, so what we'll do is we'll trim here, and then we'll cut another piece for the ends of the table, a board going perpendicular to the rest of them, and we'll use the biscuit joiner to join those end boards onto each end. So out of one board we were able to get the trim for both sides of the top. So that's why we ended up with that width. Now the next step was the legs. Now the legs were built out of a long 2x6 that was also in the barn. And the standard dining room table is 28 to 30 inches, so you can decide in there what you want to cut your table legs at. So cut those, and then I cut a large rabbet here using the table saw. You can use a router. If you have a router table, you can use if you have a nice table saw with a dado jig, or dado blades, that would be the best, or a circular saw, multiple passes, or a table saw, multiple passes, which I ended up doing. And I need to be able to move the table, so I need the legs to come apart. So what's going to happen is the legs on the ends of the table, these will be permanently secured, so each end will be permanently secured, and then the long sides will be able to be detached. So that'll fit in there, and I'll glue and screw that in from the back. Make sure it's square. And then we'll work out the way that we're going to connect the links, and I'll get to that in the next section. Okay, we've attached the apron and the legs using a corner brace. And then right now I've got some L brackets holding it up. Corner brace on each corner. And for that brace, the bolts are going all the way through. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. So now I need to cut some blocks that I'll glue to the apron piece, and then it'll screw into the tabletop. And I will also make some corner braces, because right now, even though it's sturdy, when it's standing up and down, it's going to wobble. So with the corner braces, it won't wobble. Okay, you can see we've got the corner braces connected, and then also here, these are glued to the apron and then screwed down into the tabletop. Alright, the last step in bracing my table legs are these angled braces. So I cut the angles on my compound miter saw, and it doesn't really matter what angle you choose. You just need, it needs to be parallel here and parallel or flush with the table leg here. And then what I did was using a jigsaw, handsaw, and chisel, kind of a combination. I hand sawed the angles, chiseled it out, and then on some of these I used a jigsaw. So this is inset. You can see that. So that way there's no wiggle because it's pushing up against the apron piece. And then this bolt goes all the way through the leg with the nut on the opposite side. You can see it here on the other leg. And then you can also see on the other leg, come close again, this flat brace here screws into the apron, screws into our angle brace to hold it in place. So with the bolt all the way through, the cutout, and that flat brace, that's not going anywhere, and now our table legs are not going to flex. So now the body of the table is complete. We'll start working on the bench, and then it's on to sanding. Alright, let's talk about our bench. The legs are made out of a 4x8 beam that we also found in the barn. So I cut that in to length using reciprocating saw or sawzall. You can use a table saw if you have a large enough one. And a normal dining room chair is between 16 and 18 inches. So depending on the height of your table, which should be between 20 and 30, determine how high you want your table legs to be. So I cut those beams. Now I've got a 2x6 as my support all the way across. So the way we set it up so that the 2x6 would fit right into this beam is by cutting out a notch here in my leg, and then a notch on the 2x6, set it right in there, glued it and screwed it down, but that's still not quite secure enough. So I got an 8-inch bolt drilled all the way through, connected that bolt. So now we're secure our 2x6 support beam and our legs. So the next step on our support beam, so that it sits flat, we cut out notches for these seat supports that you saw me put on earlier. We cut out notches in that 2x6 going all the way across. So when you sit on the bench, it's got a little bit of flex, but it sits down on this support 2x6 all the way across. And also with this, our support beam being secured on both ends, our bench won't move or wiggle or anything. Now to put the face or the top of the bench, the seat, and connect that to our legs. Pre-drilled a hole, and then also using a high-speed drill bit, sunk it down a little bit, the washer and a lag bolt, and make sure that you line up your lag bolts so they're not going to hit the support leg bolt going all across, so just on one side or the other, and then go down probably 4 inches is going to be extremely secure, so that way you're able to pick up the table by the seat and it won't rip apart. The next step was to sand it down. And we are ready to finish. The last piece of the bench are these support pieces at the bottom, and that keeps it from wobbling. So this is just another piece of 3/4 inch barn wood. Cut the angles and then use another hex bolt so that it matches everything else, and attach it to the leg. Now for the bottom, I use this rubber padding that you use for underneath rugs to keep them from slipping. Glued that down with the cement glue, and then a piece of felt on top of that so that the bench will slide on the wood floors in the dining room, but it also has a little bit of give because of that padding. And then I used this also on the underside of the table legs, but without the felt, because it helps it to stick in place and to not slide around on the wood floor. After sanding down the tabletop, I used an epoxy resin to finish it, which creates a smooth, durable, hard surface on the top. I did find as I was doing that because I'm using that old barn wood, there are lots of little teeny cracks that you wouldn't necessarily see. So I filled the big cracks and holes that I saw with a 5-minute epoxy beforehand, but as I was pouring this epoxy resin, a lot of it was dripping through, and not being prepared for that, I ended up wasting a lot of it. It dripped onto the table underneath. So I think a way to combat that is to make sure you seal all those holes better to start with, and or not use as much on your first coat. Let that first coat drip into those holes and dry and seal it, then put on the next one. But ultimately it took me 2 full coats, and now everything is smooth in between boards. There's no ridges, and it really brings out kind of this luster of the cedar boards, and it's very durable. It'll last for years and years with whatever the kids can throw at it. Here's kind of a close-up view of that luster from the wood grain underneath this epoxy finish. It's really beautiful. Here's the finished product using chairs that we already have. It's a great piece, looks great in this off the kitchen dining area, or can be used in a more formal dining room. Easily sits 8 people. with no problem. Great use of repurposing old barnwood, and it's going to last forever with that epoxy resin top. So if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Let me know what you think. I'll try to answer any questions the best of my ability. Check out my other videos and subscribe to my channel, and also check out my website at thegreenworkbench.com. Thank you for watching.